David Korn.
And I'm Jim Pinkerton.
Together,
we're bloggingheads.tv.
Yes. And the all new and improved, redesigned Blogging Heads TV. Look outside these little boxes. What a wonderland that exists now. Thank you, Bob Wright.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Jim, why don't we just jump right into the pool here?
Okay.
Presidential politics. I tip my hat to you. You know, you are hot on Huckabee long before all those Christians in Iowa discovered him, and you also were predicting Ron Paul's going to win New Hampshire. I think you're crazy about that, but he does seem to be getting very close, dangerously close to double digits.
I think he could win New Hampshire if the race is as divided as it appears to be, with McCain surging, Romney
quasi-surging.
Pardon?
McCain quasi-surging.
Quasi-surging. Look, I mean, if we're talking, if the victor in New Hampshire is somebody who winds up in the mid-20s, then it's pretty wide open. But I would rather take credit for spotting Huckabee as the up-and-comer in Iowa.
It must have been a message from God. You're a disciple. You saw the word. You were struck by the fever, the feeling. The power of the glory.
I sense irony in your voice, but I'll let it go.
Just a little bit. But I don't know if you've been paying attention, but I've been hot on Huckabee too.
You've been trashing him as a minor child too.
Actually, I'm kind of curious what you have to say about this. Back just all the way back in last week, at the last Republican debate before Iowa, he's out there saying, I want to be united, not a divider. We live in a very polarized society, and I'm the one who can bring us all together, perhaps underneath the symbol of a flashing cross in the form of a bookshelf. But nevertheless, he said that, and I just happened about the same time to come across a book he wrote in 1998 called Kids Killing Kids. It was basically spurred by the tragic school shooting in Jonesboro, Arkansas in March of 1998. And it really was this sort of cry to cur against all of American decline, and the cultural decline, the demoralization of America, as he called it in the book. Saying this is what's breeding these kid killers. And in this book, he had statements such in which he sort of associated environmentalism with pornography and drug abuse. He associated homosexuality with necrophilia. He said, he poo-pooed the idea of workplace equality. That means equal rights for women in the workplace. And he went on to say that if you don't believe in God, you're more prone to be evil, to be immoral, and to engage in destructive behavior. I mean, it was his right. He was a former Baptist pastor, but he's certainly playing the role here of a cultural warrior, as we've seen other people do. Really not the type of tone in which you would expect to hear from a person who wants to bring together people. In fact, he even mocked those Christians who believe, in his words, a misguided version of tolerance, in which they didn't want to offend other people. So he had his sword of Christ out back in '98.
That was quite a rant.
I'm just saying what he said.
Oddly enough, he got reelected twice more, governor of Arkansas from that point on. The same state that elected Bill Clinton 4 times. I think that, look, first of all, I don't agree with your characterization that he said that homosexuality and necrophilia are the same thing.
I didn't say he said the same thing. I'll read the quote. People can decide for themselves. This is, again, decrying the decline of American society. He said, it is now difficult to keep track of the vast array of publicly endorsed and institutionally supported aberrations, from homosexuality and pedophilia to sadomasochism and necrophilia. So he's only associating them as an aberration.
No, I don't think that's a fair reading of what you're saying.
But wait a second.
David,
Can you give me one example? You read a lot. You're a smart fellow. Can you give me one example where you see necrophilia publicly endorsed and institutionally supported anywhere in America?
You see it in the popular culture.
Necrophilia?
And black Sabbath-ish heavy metal music, you see references to it all
publicly
the time.
Endorsed and institutionally supported.
Institutionally supported, I think, means the cultural institutions. I mean, when you see a group with a name like Slipknot, as a major band with a major label, you see all these things.
From homosexuality and pedophilia.
David, let me finish the sentence. This is what Tipper Gore was so exercised about 20 years ago until the liberals beat her down. If you listen and read that stuff, you wouldn't read it aloud to your own children. You wouldn't put it in Mother Jones magazine.
What institution supports it?
I think the cultural institution.
Well, which is what? When you say institution?
The record labels. The cable news networks, all these things, cable networks, all these things are clearly part of a culture. And look, Huckabee made a series of statements there. You referred to, homosexuality and pedophilia and so on and so on. I mean, the New York Times Magazine is in a major, or at least minor, pedophilia slap controversy over a fashion spread in the last issue.
But what I'm saying is, he's saying, it's difficult to keep track of this vast array of aberrations from homosexuality and pedophilia. So he's certainly associating the two.
From apples to oranges, from sailing ships to sealing wax. There's lots.
He's certainly associating homosexuality with pedophilia.
If I made a list of all the things that are wrong with America, from too much pollution to too much crime, to too many taxes, it wouldn't be that I'm equating those things. I'm not saying that crime, taxes, and pollution are all the same or even similar. I'm saying they're all ills.
Well, let me give you another one. Abortion, environmentalism, AIDS, pornography, drug abuse, and homosexual activism have fragmented and polarized our communities. Would you put environmentalism in the same list as pornography and drug abuse?
I wouldn't, but I would certainly say that we've seen a lot of fragmentation in our society.
Well, yeah, but so has like the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees. There's one major fragmentation in our society. I wouldn't compare that to drug abuse and homosexual activism. I mean, listen. I understand where he's coming from, but this is just not the language of a guy who says, "I want to bring the country together."
Okay, let this just
saying that if you don't believe in God, you tend to.
10 years ago, it was a book. It was a creed, as you said. It was a creed de corps. But look, here's an example of what we're up against, and that is the New York Times.
Who's we? Who's we, paleface?
No, we Americans. You and I both, as American citizens.
Mm-hmm.
Is that we see a situation where the New York Times runs a photo shot that its own ombudsman says is veering on the border of child pornography. Now, I will tell you right now that if we went to Blogging Heads TV and tried to put the link for that on there, somebody would say, listen, this under Article 2257 of the child pornography laws, we got a problem here. We shouldn't do it. And we probably won't. So I'll just have to tell you that it was in the New York Times Magazine a couple weeks ago, and the ombudsman of the New York Times said it was inappropriate.
Most people agree that child pornography is bad, period. Okay, but they don't lump it together with environmentalism and homosexuality.
And do you see a linkage between social fragmentation from any source and children taking guns and shooting up their high schools?
Well, I think you could point to lots of things. I think you can point to stresses caused by problems with our economy. I think you can point to popular culture and media and violence. I think you can point to a lot of things. But I would not say, and I would question someone who does, who says, as Huckabee said in this book, another quote, men who have rejected God and do not walk in faith are more often than not immoral, impure, and improvident. So if you're a non-believer, if you don't walk in faith, you tend to be immoral. They're prone to extreme and destructive behavior. He's entitled to these views, but if he wants to be president of all America and wants to bring America together, you don't go around saying if you're a non-believer, you tend to do bad things.
I think that we should be tolerant and respectful of all people. However,
this isn't too tolerant.
The language that Huckabee is speaking in is not only the language of most Christians and most Americans. It's also the overwhelming language of American presidents. If you go back, and there's a book called Wilmington's, guided by Wilmington with 2 L's. I found it on Amazon, and it's just a list of what every political world leader the guy writing in 1981 could find, and what they said about the importance of the Bible. And it includes George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman. It includes almost all presidents, and they all talk like this. Now, you don't have to agree with them, but most Americans have and do.
How can you say you want to bring the country together and then take the position that non-believers and people who don't walk in faith, as you define faith, tend to be immoral?
I don't
Isn't that
think
overly judgmental?
I don't think that's what he said.
That's what he said. Men who have rejected,
he was talking about the cultural phenomenon.
Men who have rejected God and do not walk in faith are more often than not immoral, impure, and improvident. That's pretty plain. And then he cites Galatians 5:19 to 21. I mean, it's pretty plain what he's saying there. That's an awfully judgmental. No, as a fundamentalist Baptist pastor, he is entitled to be as judgmental as he wants.
I heard Huckabee say one time that the question was about Iran of all things, and the question said. They said, now how do you see the Iran and foreign policy and so on? And he said, listen, in my faith, Huckabee talking now, I see things in black and white. I see right and wrong, I see good and evil, and that's plain. He said, however, in politics, I see things differently. I see shades of gray, I see nuances, I see complexities. And I think that one of the realities that's so striking about Huckabee on his foreign policy is he does not have the kind of, you're with us or against us mentality that, say, George Bush has, because he sees the political realm as different than the theological
But the interesting
realm.
thing...
As Martin Luther, who was a big deal in the Huckabee world in terms of being the first Protestant, said, we must be guided by two things. We must be guided by the light of faith, where we read the Bible, and we must be guided by the light of reason, whereas as Martin Luther now, this is back in 16th century Germany, we must be guided by the light of reason, which comes to us from people such as Aristotle, who of course is not a Christian at all.
Well, I'd love to see Huckabee quote Aristotle on the campaign trail. I think his numbers would go through the roof. But I tell you, and maybe that's what he believes now, but this book, he basically says faith transcends politics, as I expect someone like
I don't think he says that. He says faith informs culture, or we're in trouble.
Well, what he says is faith is far more important, and he also says that virtually every dollar spent on a social program has been wasted.
Well, I don't think his record as governor of Arkansas doesn't.
So then the question is, what does this man believe? What do you think of the ad? The floating cross ad.
Nice Christmas ad. I see that Barack Obama has done virtually the same ad.
The little floating cross here going right through the screen. But do you believe it when he says that was just purely unintentional?
I don't know. If he said
you've been around politics. You know how they make campaign ads.
I'm telling you, some things. Look,
I know sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Campaigns, and I can tell you that people would notice things in the ads after we put them on the air that we'd never noticed. They would accuse us of stuff or give us credit for stuff that we never thought of. I truly don't know. I truly think that is a nice, sweet ad.
It wasn't a crescent. It wasn't a Star of David.
And I would point out to you that Barack Obama, with his wife and two kids, I'm not sure his children, but some of his children, they're very cute.
His kids.
Those little young to be his, are sitting there wishing America a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays. And that's Barack Obama.
No, I'm talking about the floating cross.
That even Democrats in big numbers think that these kinds of issues are important, and they are not offended and worked up as you are over somebody reacting to children shooting children in his own home state, going back to the Jonesboro case in 1998, and all the other similar Columbine kind of shootings that have been, including just in the last few days, that are really, really bothering people.
Yeah, well, listen, I, as someone who has kids in the public school, I am as troubled and as worried about that as anybody, okay? But when I see his response being that people who are non-believers tend to be immoral, which is exactly his words. I'm not putting anything into his mouth that he didn't put on paper. When he does a litany of the fragmentations in this world of ours, and he lists, he lumps environmentalism with drug abuse. I'm saying this is a guy, who at that point in time was not thinking about how to bring the country together. He was thinking about how to draw lines. So I
don't think you think about drawing lines. I do agree that there's a different voice 10 years ago. I do agree with that. But I don't think it was drawing lines. I think of it as trying to preach to the culture.
Right. Well, then, okay.
And again, let's bear in mind, to go back in time to those days of like the Columbine shooting, when it really sort of dawned on us as Americans, as middle-class Americans, that movies like Basketball Diaries, which seems to be the shoot 'em up, kill everybody in your high school movie, that a lot of these killers seem to have seen on DVDs, if not in the theaters. The Hollywood was making movies like that and proclaiming with chest-beating enthusiasm, free speech says we can do this. Well, there is such a thing as free speech, but there's also such a thing as being responsible. There's such a thing as not putting crazy idea in the heads of teenage males. And David, you and I are both former teenage males, and we know how many crazy thoughts we had in our heads back then. And we're glad we didn't act all of them, obviously, or any of them, hopefully.
Well, I didn't need too many movies to come up with those crazy ideas, I have to say. I had plenty.
But we know there's such a thing as copycat activity, and we know that...
But listen, I'm not talking about a remark he made in the heat of the reaction after Jonesboro. I'm talking about a series of remarks or statements that are in a book, which I assume he wrote, he edited, he looked at more than once, and came out months later. So I'm not going to give him a pass on this. And if he wants to say I'm different now, then let him be honest about it and talk about these remarks.
I think what he would say, my guess would be he'd say, listen, I was writing that book with one purpose, and I'm running for president for another purpose. I mean, for example, Huckabee has said...
Well, in the book he poo-poos the idea of workplace equality for women, and he quotes a 19th century pastor, saying that these laws never work out for women. Okay, so let's let him answer that today. Why is that even in the book? I don't know, unless he wants moms to stay home and to make sure the kids don't go out and kill people. But nevertheless, there's a lot of stuff in this book, and if he wants to say that was then, this is now, and I've changed my views, fine. Let him go and do it.
I'm not saying he would say I changed my views. I'm pretty sure he would say that he is, and you'll of course, being a crusading journalist that you are, we'll get to the bottom of this. He would say I was addressing one audience then and a different audience now.
Oh, but listen, we've both been around politics long enough to know that that can get you into trouble. But also, it raises the question of what you really feel and believe.
It does, and people should ask him, and people should probe him on that. Look, there's some issues where he's just clearly has changed his position. I'll give you an example.
Immigration.
I'll give you another example. Immigration is one, I think that's right. But another one is agricultural exports to Cuba.
Right.
When he was the governor of Arkansas representing rice growers, he thought it was a good idea to export more to Cuba. And now he's running for president, and he's saying, now I see a larger perspective here. I want to be president of all the American people.
Jim, come on. That's...
I'm saying he changed his mind. Is that not a fact? He
changed his mind, but why do you think he changed his mind? Because he saw a larger perspective, or because he saw Republican primary-based voters?
Fine. Okay, I'm not arguing with you. I'm saying that's an example of change. That's an example of him changing his mind.
But, and also...
And The Nation magazine and all the Castro fans down there are free to trash Huckabee for doing that. Not that they're going to vote for him anyway. That's
listen, there
are
plenty of business people who are not Nation, or rather Jones subscribers who take the same position. Many Republican.
You're right. And that's what politics are for.
Yeah, no, that's what politics are for.
But I'm saying that is an example of a change. I freely concede he changed his mind on that issue.
Well, yeah, but as we see with Mitt Romney, changing one's mind, raises the question: why and what do you actually believe in? I'm all for people changing their mind. I change my mind at least once every 17 years. But if someone's running for president, you're entitled to an explanation for that change. Look at Mitt Romney.
Who doubts that the Huckabee campaign will be watching us, blogging Hits TV, and saying we got to help David with his doubts about us, and call you up immediately?
Speaking of Mitt Romney and changing his mind, he's now out there decrying abortion when he used to support abortion rights. And
went to Planned Parenthood fundraisers.
That's a point. A picture came out the other day of him appearing at a Planned Parenthood fundraiser, and to which I think his wife gave $150. And my question to Mitt Romney is, "What's up, cheapskate? You're worth millions and millions of dollars. You and your wife support some cause. You even go to the fundraiser, and all you kick in is $150 that barely covers the cost of the hors d'oeuvres."
It does make you wonder, and inquiring minds might wonder about this, whether he actually gave more than that. Nobody's caught it yet.
Yeah, well, those records should be available, and I imagine Planned Parenthood has gone through the receipts to look at what he has and what he's given.
Unless they know he's still one of them, and they don't want to hurt him.
Yeah, no, I think they don't. As far as I see, they've pretty much turned on him as they should have.
Fair enough, but Romney illustrates the point, which is getting back to the flip-flop issue. I mean, Romney genuinely has changed his position on issues on big issues. He's not just changing tonalities, but big issues.
Yeah, not just Cuba. I mean, gay rights, gun control, abortion.
Yeah, how you organize your society, those are big issues.
Yeah, very big issues. And
I
I still can't get over the fact that, he basically sold a lot of people. A lot of people bought into this. Some evangelical social conservatives who might not even like a Mormon have jumped on his ship, which also leads me to wonder if you have this interesting dynamic going on now within the religious right, and that is Huckabee is surging, and which indicates that at the grassroots level, social conservatives, are hearing his message and being drawn to it. But at the top, as he himself has complained, the James Dobsons of the world, and Pat Robertson, of course, who went with Giuliani, they're not flocking to his campaign. And so are we looking at a situation where, the grassroots, the people in the pews, so to speak, are going to look at their elites and say, hey, here's one of our guys, you're not backing him up. Why should we listen to you down the road? Is there a split coming here?
Look, I think there's always a split. Organisms are always, mitosising, or is it meiosis? I can't remember which. In their leadership, and I do think, as somebody who's been through a fair number of Republican politics over the last 30 years, that the split we're seeing now in the Republican Party in 2008, or almost 2008, is reminiscent of what we saw in 1975, 1976. The establishment, if you will, was for Gerald Ford,
right,
and the grassroots were for Reagan.
Right.
And of course, Ford was president, so he got the nomination. I think this time around it'll be much tougher for Romney is now playing the Ford role. If you're what passes for the Republican establishment these days, Bush 41, who sort of semi-endorsed him in Texas a few weeks ago.
Well, he let him give him speech there.
Well, but he gave him a warm introduction, praised his mother, praised his father. I mean, again, you can't get too much chummier than that without crossing the line. It was, believe me, it was intended to be a semi-pseudo quasi-endorsement of Romney.
It's done a lot of good.
Well, no, I'm not sure it has done that much good. The point is, it's not for lack of trying. Right. And I think that the race is now kind of, you can sort of squint and see the race becoming sort of a Huckabee-Romney race, with Huckabee having the grassroots and Romney having the elites. So I agree, it is strange how Romney managed to get the National Review and Paul Weyrich and whoever else among the top leaders. And Giuliani, Jim Antle in the American Spectator has a piece. He says, now listen, isn't it interesting that the grassroots, that the elites of many social conservatives are supporting Giuliani, who was for taxpayer-funded abortions right now? Right. That is kind of a stretch to imagine he's the best that the conservatives can do. But that's the split. I think we'll play out in a Huckabee-Romney dynamic.
Well, this is what happens when you spend years, if not decades, telling the religious right, as the Republican Party, you are us, we are you, and then when they actually end up, believing the rhetoric and believing, which is, it's a card that Karl Rove and others have been playing since, the Reagan years, and then what someone comes along who plucks their heartstrings, and they're going to look and they're going to see the Republican Party establishment just stomp on this guy, and maybe it will be a little, dash of cold baptismal water being thrown at them, and they'll see, well, we've been played for suckers for these years.
And then maybe they're back to being socialists, right, David? And that's the goal.
Just like Jesus.
Lots of luck. I don't think it'll happen. I'll tell you why, for two reasons. One, I don't think, first of all, the alliance has been more fruitful for the conservatives and the religious right than you give them credit for. To wit, Rehnquist, Scalia, Clarence Thomas, John Roberts, and Alito. So, in other words, there's plenty of evidence that the conservative coalition at the top, including the president, have delivered for social conservatives on many big issues. I think that it was Will Salatin at Slate Magazine who wrote a book a few years ago about how the conservatives have won the abortion debate. Now,
the abortions are still legal and, and freely available.
But I'll grant the book was a little sort of a leading indicator, but it was a pretty smart book, and he was pretty right, I think, about where the social cultural trends are taking us, which is to say that Phyllis Schlafly and Henry Hyde are in the process of seeing their movement win, and that's Catholics and Southern Baptists united in a coalition nobody could quite imagine. So I know, David, you hate to see the New Deal coalition become, in many respects, the Reagan coalition, but that's kind of what's happened, and it's difficult.
Well, first we should note that Henry Hyde did pass away. So
he unfortunately he left us. But the point is that the movement he started going back 30 years.
And when abortion is illegal, the way these people want it to be, that will be the true victory. And then we'll see what happens to the Republican Party for having supported that. But that's all hypothetical. Let's jump back to the here and now. We've looked at Romney and Huckabee. You kind of very quickly went past Giuliani, McCain, Thompson. They out for the count? They're just showing up to be seen?
I wouldn't be surprised if McCain wins New Hampshire.
I thought you said Ron Paul was going to win. I'm so confused.
I wouldn't be surprised if Ron Paul wins New Hampshire. I keep telling you, it's a wide open race.
Yeah.
I think look, McCain has enormous cred inside the party, but is also hated by much of the party.
This is the one guy who's done the heavy lifting on the war. He's been there from the beginning. He did take on Rumsfeld and was critical of that, but he was there for the surge. He's put his backside on the line for this, and it seems he's getting very little love from the Republican voters, according to the polls, for doing that.
One issue that has hurt McCain badly, really badly, much more so than anybody here in town realizes, or if you realize this, McCain-Feingold. The McCain-Feingold law, the sense the federal government's going to reach
heard this argument
and regulate. I mean, I'm just saying what you hear, what they call in the pollstering world verbatims. I would never vote for John McCain because ... fill in the blank. And the answer, more than I could imagine, is McCain-Feingold. So it's just a lesson in terms of every party has its litmus test, and if your litmus piece of paper turns the wrong color, you might get out of luck.
Given that McCain-Feingold gave us a regimen last time around, or regime at least, in which the 527s were able to put out the Swift boat ads, which sunk John Kerry, I would say that Republicans should be cheering John McCain.
And George Soros and Peter Lewis are delighted that the 527s can spend like 2 or 3 times as much on the Democrats as on the Republicans. But I agree with you. McCain-Feingold is worthless in terms of regulating anything, but it's absolutely pernicious, and it's worse than worthless in the sense that it does seek to restrain the free speech activism of ordinary Americans.
There is absolutely no gratitude on the part of the Republicans if they are turning on the guy who has supported their war through thick and thin because of the McCain-Feingold law, which has little bearing on what's happening today.
I mean, they also just to answer your question, picky. I would also say another big one is global warming, and the sense that McCain is too quick to jump in the political bed
with Joe Lieberman,
with the Liebermans of the world, who are in turn too quick to jump in bed with the Europeans and Ban Ki-moon on a global warming treaty.
We should wait until we lose Manhattan, and then
we should do lots of things, but we maybe have nuclear power, but we shouldn't necessarily do what France does and have 80% of our electricity come from nukes. But what we shouldn't
Are we putting that waste in your backyard?
I'm sorry.
Are we putting the waste in your backyard?
Listen, you're talking to somebody who's for the breeder reactor way back when.
I know.
That we wouldn't have to even make more of it. You wouldn't have to throw it away. You could just recycle it at the Clinch River plant back in Tennessee. So I think there's lots of solutions here. I'm just telling you, I'm explaining to you, David, why McCain.
Okay.
I don't see much of a future for him past what might be kind of a
now. Fred Thompson is claiming that he's about to surge. Not that he has yet, but that he's poised. He's on the precipice of surging.
Well, I can't see you on this through the technology here, but I can only imagine the twinkle in your eye as you say that.
Does he? Is there a possibility that he can somehow thread the needle between this mud wrestle that's evolving between Romney and Huckabee?
It's possible, but I would call. I would say.
Time's kind of a wasting, isn't it?
I mean, it's just there's not much. I mean, look, the country mustn't vote in the Republican Party. Again, it had at one time or another it had competing for it. George Allen until he got beaten last year, former Governor Gilmore of Virginia, and other possibles in the race like Haley Barbour or Mark Sanford. Of course, neither of them ever got in the race. And Huckabee and Thompson had kind of a bake-off, and Huckabee appears to have won. Now, again, nothing's still 2 weeks to go, so who knows? But it does appear unlikely.
Can Huckabee win the nomination?
Sure.
What would happen to what would elite Republicans, as you like to call them, here in Washington do, or how would they respond?
Some would freak out. Some would try and get Bloomberg to run for which I don't think we much of a job of persuading him to get into the race.
That's a good strategy. Get the New York Jew to go up against the Baptist minister. I don't see Bloomberg being credible.
Well, the December 7th issue of the New York Sun, which I assume is kind of close to the Bloomberg administration, had a map on the front page that showed Bloomberg winning up to 312 electoral votes. Now, again, I report, you decide. I tend to be skeptical, too, of third-party candidates, but we've never seen anybody with the kind of money that Bloomberg has. Plus, and we got to say it, he's been mayor of New York. He's been mayor of. It's not like Perot coming out of nowhere. He's been mayor of New York for the last 7 years or so, and I think most people think he's done a pretty good job. And so you can't.
But go back to the Republican elite. So you think some would freak out and try to get Bloomberg? Is there any other scenario?
Well, yeah, a lot of them would support. A lot of them support the Democrat. But on the other hand, I think that a lot of Democrats at the grassroots level would support Huckabee. I think that a lot of the Richard Gephardt vote would easily go to Huckabee in a general election.
Oh, are you serious? What Democrat? On the basis of what issue?
Trade, healthcare, education.
But he's going to
moral values.
On healthcare, on education, he's going to be stronger than the Democrat.
He's not. I didn't say from a pure. Well, first of all, he would ask one question, and that is, should healthcare go to non-citizens? And Obama and Hillary would say yes, and Huckabee would say no. And I think that would end the debate among big chunks of blue, purple, or red state America.
Well, if that was the case,
if Eliot Spitzer couldn't sell a driver's license plan that gives free documents, in effect free documents to illegals in blue New York State, then how is some Democrat going to sell a health care plan that gives $5,000 or $10,000 worth of health insurance to everybody, whether or not they're a citizen? I can't think of a more colossal non-starter. And again, I would point out what happened to Hillary on the driver's license issue among Democrats.
Because we certainly would rather have people with the plague walking around not being treated for it, and because that's actually better for society.
No, we don't think there should be illegal people here.
Yes, but Jim, as you know, there are.
Well, they don't have to be.
Well, you can. Why don't we then do Huckabee's 120-day policy? Okay. They can sell. You have 6 months to go. 4 months.
What's wrong with that?
You think it's going to work?
I think it would probably work better than you want it to.
Okay. Well, good. And anyone who's for it can start picking their own lettuce tomorrow.
We can automate. We can pay higher. We can pay higher. I mean, others, David, listen to yourself. Don't you want working people to get higher wages?
Sure.
Okay, well, good. How do you do it?
Well, we boosted the minimum wage last year. That was one way to do it.
That's fine. Boost minimum wage is fine. But the point is, you can't have cheaper labor coming in all the time to undercut the minimum wage.
Listen, I am for doing what we can to stop the flow of cheaper labor in. But we do have 11 to 12 million people who are here already, who are integrated into our society, many who have children here. And if they get sick, I don't want them walking around getting sicker and sicker.
I guarantee Huckabee doesn't either. But I'll tell you this.
Yeah, this is a guy. Forget what he says on the campaign trail, because we know that's a lot of crap. This is a guy who has very nobly defended giving tuition assistance to the children of illegal immigrants.
Right. I suspect that as president, Huckabee would come up with some reasonable, plausible way to
flip flop
of dealing with the people who are already here.
Okay. Well, that's
fine. The main test, though, is do you stop new people from coming here? Now, when we see, for example, that the Senate, including some Republicans, is backing away from building the wall, what does that tell blue-collar America? It says that the elites are coming after you folks. They plan on continuing the flood of illegal people coming in to take away and out undercompete your job.
Well,
that's just the reality that ordinary Americans can see. And so if Huckabee were to get the nomination, I'm not saying he will, but if he were, I think he'd have a heck of a message
I know.
Illinois, Missouri, Ohio, Nebraska,
listen,
Kentucky.
I know your dream is to see immigration be the center issue for the general election in November. It may not come to pass, and Huckabee is trying now to jump on that bandwagon, even though he hasn't been there in the past. And we'll see just how sincere this former minister can be on this issue when he starts to flip-flop.
But you asked me how I thought the general election would go.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that there's just no question that the working-class Democrats do not like illegal immigration. Elite Democrats, in a strange way, seem to either like it or think it's inevitable or necessary or something, but they can't bring themselves and to talk about this issue, and I think it's going to kill them.
They
general election politics.
Listen, I think the plan that that McCain and the Democrats worked out on last year was, there were some differences and difficulties Democrats had with it, but I think that was probably would have been pretty acceptable to most Democrats.
That's the point. The country rejected it soundly.
No.
And the point is that
the country did not. The country did not reject.
From a Republican point of view, the beauty of this situation is the Democrats still think. Now, even after the immigration bill faltered in the spring of 2007, they still think they can do it again. They have every intention of pushing the same plan through in January 2009. And the argument they make is we'll do it quicker. And it won't be people won't even notice. And again, that's believe me, this is money in the bank for the Republicans.
Well, that remains to be seen. On the Democratic side, I mean, listen, I know on radio talk shows, immigration is a big ticket item. If you look at some of the recent polling that come out about what issues motivate most Americans, it's not on the top. But
rule of law and national security are.
Fundamental economic issues are.
Well, again, look, if Huckabee were some libertarian who wanted to abolish Social Security, then I'd say you have a point. But the thing that confounds Democrats is that Huckabee basically agrees with Democrats on a lot of these issues of the well-being of the middle class. Probably agrees with them more than some limousine liberal like John Kerry.
You kind of really lost me on that one.
No, because look, the historic position of people from Arkansas.
We'll see. Huckabee is now spinning around and trying to reestablish himself on a number of issues, and we'll see how true he is. I mean, in '98 he wrote a book saying virtually every dollar spent on a social program is wasted. Now you say that he sees eye to eye with Democrats on this. Well, let's see.
I said he sees eye to eye with working class
Democrats. Well, let's see where he is on post Iowa, post New Hampshire.
Okay. Let's talk about the Democrats, because I really want to hear what you have to say about who's ahead and who's behind on the Democratic side.
It's the thing that I find interesting, and why I've changed my thinking. As I said, this happens once every 17 years. Is I initially came into this whole campaign season thinking, Iowa didn't matter. There's so much early action. It didn't really matter what happened in Iowa. Then I came to believe, well, wait a second. If Obama can't, win in Iowa, or John Edwards too, his goose would probably be cooked and Hillary would roll on. And then it was like, all of a sudden, well, Hillary had to win because Obama had put her on the ropes, and if she didn't win Iowa, her whole argument of inevitability and invincibility would collapse. Now I'm thinking, you know what? Iowa may not matter. I mean, I say that somewhat flippantly, but I mean, if there's no blowout, I was talking to one Clinton fundraiser a couple of days ago and asked, "Are you worried about Iowa?" And the person said, "Well, yes and no. Of course, you want to win. You don't want the narrative to become Hillary, is fighting for her life. But at the same time, I can tell you, we have plenty of money, and he has plenty of money. And the only reason you ever get out of a political race, really, is that you run out of money. So this can slog on through New Hampshire, through South Carolina, and all the way to Super Duper Tuesday on February 5th. And so in the last couple of weeks, we've really gotten to a frenzy over what's going to happen in Iowa, and then there are those 5 and 10 states between Iowa and New Hampshire. But it seems to me that it's possible for this to really be, a marathon. Think of what was it, Rocky 3 or 4 or 5, which every round feels like the last round of a 20-round match. That this could just feel that way, pow, boom, poo, for a good 5-6 weeks. And, it's going to, I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to being rather exhausted during all this. And right now, Hillary seems to have gotten part of her mojo back. At least, she's gotten some of her footing back. But, this could be a neck-and-neck battle all the way through February 6th. And can you imagine waking up on that Wednesday morning and trying to sort out the results in 20 to 30 different states, and which may end up splitting in very different directions.
You raise a good point, and that is because we all talk about Super Tsunami Tuesday, February 5th, and we haven't even paid attention to what's after that. Those states, whoever they are, South Dakota, I don't know, I don't even know what states are not on the ballot on 5th. I mean, all you think about is Florida, New York, California, New Jersey, Michigan, or whatever it is. And so it could. That's an interesting scenario.
I mean, is it possible?
Hillary certainly has the name ID and the money and everything else to sort of not admit that she's been defeated for quite a good long time, and of course, and probably maybe the same with Obama.
In some ways, Obama has already won Iowa. How? By just the last few weeks convincing people that he was competitive. I mean, that was Iowa. We said he needed to win Iowa to show he was competitive. But if it's a really close match and he isn't blown away, and even if he loses by a couple of points, and the poll numbers show that that he doesn't crater and that he's still doing well in South Carolina or wherever, then people are going to say, hey, we got a real fight on our hands. It's not over yet. And then the question becomes, we live in what a lot of people call a winner-take-all society, and our political system certainly is designed on that principle, and that's the way things usually work. The chips usually fall in the same direction. But is it at all possible, as we go through Super Tuesday and beyond, that the chips fall in different directions, and you sort of have what in the sort of an old-fashioned race for delegates? You really start counting the delegates on each side. We haven't had a campaign like that in a long time.
Yeah, the last ones I can think of that were sort of even close were like 80 and 76.
Yeah.
Like this. And 80 wasn't really that close between Carter and Kennedy. 76 was, and they actually were counting delegates and maneuvering around up until the eve of the convention.
And some years people talk about the super delegates could. If the delegate selected by primaries and caucuses ends up being a close count, then the number of super delegates, the people who are party officials and funders or whatever, could they sway it one way or the other? This is all highly speculative, and it could be that Obama or Hillary is proven to have a glass jar pretty early on. But talking to this, at least to this one Clinton fundraiser, convinced me, or got me thinking at least, that we may have to sit tight for a while and just watch.
What do you think Edwards, Dodd, Biden, Richardson, whoever else will be up to in the next few weeks, or after Iowa and New Hampshire?
I think Edwards really needs. He needs to be really, really close in Iowa, but I think he needs to come in second, if not win. Because if you look at the polling now, and look where he's spent his money and his time, he's not really. He really hasn't done much in New Hampshire and South Carolina, and so if he doesn't win in Iowa, doesn't sort of place a real close second, and turn it into a two-person race with him and whether it's Hillary or Barack Obama, I don't know. Then where does he go? Where is his next field of opportunity? I just don't see it. So I think it is kind of do or die for him there. And the problem that that Biden, Dodd, Richardson all have is that there's a pretty limited amount of oxygen in the room, and the three leading candidates all are pretty fine by most Democratic voter standards. There's going to be very few Democrats out there who are going to say, God, I hate I hate all of the top three, and I really want to, and I'm waiting to see who else can come along and, capture that. And whoever places fourth, if it's Biden, Richardson, or Dodd, it's not going to be much in the way of bragging rights. If one of them manages, through some miracle, see Mike Huckabee, to place third and, bump, one of the top three to fourth, then maybe they'll get some attention and maybe some, little momentum. But, it's just, I don't know how they elbow their way into the remaining races.
Okay, fair enough. So then it's Obama versus Hillary.
But I will say this, on that point, the one possible surprise, and I will say one possible little surprise, is Biden in Iowa. He's gotten a lot of endorsements. I've seen interviews with a lot of Iowan voters who are impressed with his answers in the debates and his intelligence in talking about foreign policy and seriousness. He has more experience than Hillary, and if you don't like Barack Obama, or you don't think Edwards is up, but again, I just don't think there's much room for him to sort of to go anywhere, even if he does place, does well fourth and blows out the rest of the second tier.
Okay, I should tell you that I wrote a column on Tuesday, which I said that if I was sort of inside the mind of Mike Bloomberg. and I've said that if the Democrats, Bloomberg talking now, if the Democrats run Hillary and Rudy, then obviously there's not much room for another New Yorker in the mix. But if the Democrats were to not run Hillary and the Republicans were to not run Rudy, then there'd be lots of room, and they would run, say, Obama and Huckabee, or Edwards and Huckabee, or Edwards and whoever, then there'd be lots of room for me to get in the middle, and I think that is a major wild card.
But the thing, this is what I wrote about Bloomberg months ago during one of the Bloomberg bubbles, and that is, I'll take the man seriously when he says something about the Iraq War. It's not getting a lot of attention now, but it still will be a big issue in the general election. He has not come down hard on either side. You're going to have a Democratic candidate who wants to end the war. You're going to have a Republican candidate who wants to continue the war. There really isn't going to be a lot of middle ground room. Well, what's his position going to be on that? He's done everything possible not to talk about it for years now. He may just be smart enough to say to himself, using the Jim Pinkerton example here, do I really want this mess in my hand and take responsibility for this? And so again, until I see him talking about the number one, foreign policy, if not the number one issue on the plate of the next president, I just can't take this chatter with too much seriousnness.
Well, you might be right, but on the other hand, the New York Post says he's hiring people and getting ready for a campaign. So, we'll have never seen anything like that before. Well, a lot of the trends that you and I have talked about, all of us have talked about over the years, fragmentation of the media, how the internet enables people to connect to each other at almost zero cost through, MySpace and Facebook and so on, and the sort of the discreditation of most of the political institutions in this country has kind of knocked down all the trees, if you will, and leaving a big opening in the forest for somebody like Bloomberg. Lou Dobbs.
The media universe does make it easier, particularly if you have a lot of money. But again, issues and where what you're actually selling when you get that media space, makes a difference. And on most issues, he's not going to be much different than the Democratic candidate, right?
Well, I think that's. I think you raise a good point. That could be trouble. That could be trouble if it's two pro-choice, pro-gay marriage, or semi-pro-gay marriage candidates in a race against the Republicans.
Yeah, in some ways, Bloomberg getting into the race may be an act of God for Mike Huckabee. Thank you. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. Maybe on that note.
On that note, anyway, since you're invoking the deity right and left here,
I'm just getting ready for the next citizenship test that we're going to have. Always good talking to you, Jim. I'll see you closer to...
Happy holidays.
Yes. Merry Kwanzaa to you.
I'll be celebrating Christmas,
Yeah,
but I think that everybody should celebrate the holiday that's
and I
appropriate
hope
to
you'll
them.
be taking that day to contemplate the meaning of Christ. Not thinking about politics, as Mike Huckabee urges you to do. It's always fun. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, David. See you next year.